Welcome, everyone. This is Francesco here with Chris Jones of Cofounder Dynamics. And this is a Zoom webinar on change, how people change. And it's a topic that naturally comes up in a lot of partnerships. It's a perfectly natural response. I don't know if it's a helpful response, but it's certainly a common and a common thing to want our partners to be different. We want them to change. We have, um, we in a way have as separate parties. We see our partners. We see the areas where they struggle more clearly sometimes than they see themselves. But also, we have our own ideas and preferences about how things ought to be done, and what ought to be done and when and so forth. And when they don't align with those of our partners, it can be a really uh, a difficult experience and disconcerting and stressful and cause fights. And it's easy to think like, um, well, I should just, if I explain, X, Y, Z to my partner, like, and uh, I it's unclear to me why they can't just change. Like, why can't they just do things this way? I mean, we're partners after all, right? But yet, uh, it often doesn't pan out that way. Instead, like we'll get like a defensive response, or sometimes maybe we'll get like, um, uh, you know, instead of our partners will be like, well, why should I change? Why don't you change this like X, Y, and Z? And so there'll be this kind of back and forth, and or sometimes partner might even say, yeah, I agree with you, and that makes sense, and but then the desired behavior doesn't really change the way you think it will, and that can happen as well, and so. Um, what I have found most helpful in the whole realm of change is really gaining uh, a deeper understanding of the process of change itself. Like, what is it that enables people to change? What is it that causes people to change? Um, and what is it that can get in the way of that? And having more understanding of really the mechanics, or really the human condition as a whole, has helped me to navigate those areas where this is coming up a lot in my relationships. So that's the intention behind this seminar, is to really uh, dive into an understanding of how people change and how they don't change. With the idea that once we have that a better understanding, navigating the whole thing it makes it that much easier. At least that's my experience. So, a couple of introductory uh, comments. So one of them is that it's, first of all, I think, really important and helpful to appreciate that we do change. Like, we change uh, all the time. We change a lot. People change a lot. I think that there is a myth out there that people don't really change, or they don't change at some basic level, and that's, I think, absolutely false. I think we're hardwired to change. As we go through life, we learn and adapt uh, and modify. Our understanding of life changes, the meaning of things to us changes, our relationships change, uh, and that's just par for the course. Um, so that, I think, is uh, a very hopeful realization, which is that change really is in the cards for us, and that is has been very helpful to me to kind of understand that, because in relationships there are going to be areas that are like less than ideal, and the understanding that there is the potentiality and for change and progression in the areas that are less than ideal. Just knowing that that's in the cards and possible, and is a very helpful thing uh, to have going for you. Uh, the corollary to that, however, is that change isn't exactly something that we're really in charge of. It's not something that we can do because we want to. Uh, it's not. It's not controlled really by in any sort of linear or rational sense. I mean, if it were, we'd be living in a very different world. It there seems to be some other factors at play as to, when change happens, what enables change, right? And then it's very clearly there are areas where people, where we as people get where we have blind spots. There are ideas that we have and ways of being that we've developed that become so room temperature for us that it doesn't even look to us that they're problematic, um, that they may be causing difficulties and problems in our partnerships and in our life. So some of our most difficult qualities don't look like that to us. And so they just look like the way things are, you know, um, like for example, someone who is, let's say, very combative, uh, probably doesn't necessarily think that's a problem. They just look at the world and see enemies and reasons to be combative, and that's just how things look. So the idea of changing uh, wouldn't make sense in a world filled with enemies. Why wouldn't I be combative, right? Uh, uh, and and so that's how it is. Like a perfectionist, for someone who has a lot of perfectionistic tendencies, it's just like they're just doing things to their standards, like the way things, it seems to them that things ought to be done in this way, you know. Uh, but the other thing is that even when we know, like even when we know we have perfectionistic tendencies, for example, right, uh, or combative tendencies, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be able to stop right away, right? So that's why people go around saying, "Oh, that's my perfectionism in me coming out again." So, so change, is again, it's not really driven by willpower. I mean, willpower might work for like, I don't know, like 3 days, but enduring change, it seems, is governed by something else. So the this kind of like the two these 2 points, there's like there's reason for hope in that there is changes in the cards, and possible, and more than possible in a way, it's inevitable. And on the other hand, there's reason for humility about change, and the recognition that we're not really entirely in the driver's seat here. And so kind of blaming ourselves or our partners for, um, where we are, is, in a way, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? It's counterproductive, and unfair, because I think every single one of us has personal experience with just how frustrating it can be when, we'd like to change, but it's just not necessarily totally within our control, right? So removing the whole blame thing and the personal dimension of it, I think, is a big forward step in this whole conversation. Uh, and in lieu of, like, or what to replace that with, I would say, is again, like diving into, okay, change is not driven by willpower. It's not driven really by choice. So what are the mechanics of change? Like, what is it that does enable people to change? And that's what I want to turn to now. And I think to the thing I think that's most significant to understand is that our behaviors or how we are in life is uh, it's not it's a byproduct. In other words, it's kind of a downstream. We behave a certain way because of a set of ideas and beliefs, and this whole invisible layer of understandings and beliefs, and uh, that that we have often not consciously, that cause us to see life in a certain way, and then we just behave based on how we see things and how we understand things. And it's the understanding and the seeing that that is a filter that drives our behavior. So when we're trying to fix behavior, uh, it's kind of like it's like too late. You know, we're dealing with symptoms and effects, not causes, and we're not going upstream enough. People change when their understanding of things changes. They see things in a new light. Like, we change when we see things in a new light. We see things differently, and when we see things differently, behaviors that used to make sense no longer make sense. You know, or um, they and from that point forward, those old behaviors just fall away because it's no longer logical to engage in those. It wouldn't even occur to you. So I think it's helpful. I thought it might be helpful to share some examples of this from my own, experience of where I've changed. So I used to be, um, I would say, very indecisive. I was a very someone who had a lot of struggled a lot with decision making, and I would always find myself at these kind of forks in the road, and just fretting over them and stressing over them, and like going back and forth, and kind of beating myself up for not being more kind of clear and decisive, uh, and it was that way for a really long time until um, I gained this understanding that that whole um, experience of ambivalence and indecisiveness was really just a, a kind of like an insecure response that I had. Like, when I would get stressed, it would show up in that way. So I started to see that it was just a kind of static that was it was just kind of like a mental static, and that if I just kind of tuned it out, I could just do the next thing, and there was always something that I could do to keep moving things forward. And I started to focus on just that next thing and not worry about decisions and choices, and kind of let things take. So that was just like, that uh, that level of understanding that I gained about indecisiveness, that it was really just mental static. Uh, it changed my whole relationship to decision making, and I started to not be as concerned with making decisions, troubled by them, and this whole kind of what way of thing that I was struggling with. It didn't stop like immediately, but it just became less and less of a factor um, for me over time. Uh, Yeah, another example is one of my responses in relationships tends to be to kind of withdraw. Like if I'm, kind of not liking how things are going, rather than engage or move in the direction of engaging around it, I will tend to go in the opposite direction and withdraw and kind of go into a little bit of a cave mode. But it wasn't obvious to me that that's what I was doing until I got married, and then in the context of a close partnership, uh, my partner wasn't particularly fond of that way of responding to things. And and I, initially was just like, "What do you mean? Like that's just, I mean, I'm not. It's not personal. I'm just, I just need some time and space. And but as I gained an understanding like that, that kind of tendency to withdraw was really just I don't know, just a habitual response, and uh, it was optional. Like I didn't have to respond that way, uh, and I started to understand that it was hard for my partner, and so by kind of just deepening in an understanding of what's going on and why I would withdraw and so forth, like all those behavioral patterns started to shift, and again, not dramatically, not like suddenly, but but as there's an awakening of behaviors, there's more freedom, more options, and more flexibility, and behaviors. I have found that behaviors have shifted, over time, and I think that's much more what change looks like than the grand epiphany and sudden transformation. And that is why I think it can seem to people that change doesn't happen, because it does. It's just happens so it happens incrementally, um, and the incrementalism can be such that you don't notice the improvements. Um, so, given that change occurs through a transformation of understanding, a deepening of understanding, um, what does that tell us um, about how to be in partnerships? Well, I feel, to my mind, I think that as partners, what we want to do is show up in a way that is conducive to change, right? Conducive to positive change. And what is conducive to positive change is that spirit of curiosity and reflectiveness and the search for understanding. And that's why, if you read a lot of like relationship books and courses, there's a lot of emphasis that's kind of placed on not like stepping back from reactivity and speaking in a neutral way and sharing uh, with your partner your own experience, like uh, and how you're feeling about things, and engaging in this dialogue. I mean, the idea behind that is to share understanding, and enter into a state in your partnerships of mutual exploration and mutual discovery of each other's inner world. And as we do that in a reflective and kind of emotionally neutral place, um, those are the conditions under which people have realizations. They see things that we haven't seen, when we start to look at things in that kind of spirit of curiosity. Like if I ask you, Chris, about how the world looks to you and why you did this or why you did that, or I'm gonna learn something that I didn't know, and it will help me. Uh, and that learning will inform my behavior towards you, um, because it's a deeper understanding that I have, and likewise, you're articulating that, you know, might lead to new understandings, things you hadn't seen before, and those new understandings are that's what's going to lead to change. So it's like this that reflective journey, and the openness to having new understanding, and seeing things in new ways. That is the process of change. Now, um, what 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 I would say interferes with that process, stunts it. I don't think it ever really fully stops it, but it certainly can be stunted and blocked up, and by you know just a for lack of a better word, like a kind of fight or flight type of stuckness that we get into, where we've learned to rely on certain patterns and ways of being, and have relied on them for so long that, uh, again, like they're blind spots, like they just look like how things are. So there's that reflectiveness isn't there. It's not there because that whole thing is invisible. And if you go near it, it's like, you know, uh, poking a sleeping bear. This whole like area where where these there's so much hurt underneath it, or defensiveness, and that it can be very tough. And the comic the comedy and tragedy of it is those areas that are most difficult to be reflective about also tend to be the ones that cause the most friction and tension. So, that is a pickle. And that is, it kind of in a nutshell, like that's really the crossroads point in our deepest partnerships and relationships, is when we touch those sleeping bears, what is going to occur? Um, and I, I don't think this discussion would be complete without really looking at those, which are the toughest areas in our partnerships. Now, and with respect to those areas, I think there's a few observations I would want to make. So one of them is that the thing that is, it's not within our control as to uh, whether our partners will wake up to those areas, and experience reflectiveness around them, and experience change around them. It's not within our it's that's not sort of our job. um, but I think that there are things that we can do as partners to make it easier for our partners, and more likely for our partners to begin to have some insights around those areas, and and experience shifts in those areas. So one of them is, if we're upset by our partner's behavior, we really need to come face to face with the fact that that's on us. And our being upset by what our partner's doing is on us. Uh, uh, and it's our work as partners to become more to have more equanimity, um, and peace, and to keep our bearings in our partnership. Uh, no matter what, our being angered, triggered, upset by our partner's behavior is not going to help. It's not going to help. In fact, it will tend to keep the patterns locked in place. So our upset will trigger defensiveness and fight or flight in our partners, and so we'll just stay kind of locked on a hamster wheel there. So by gaining some equanimity and perspective, and an understanding that if we're upset, that's because of what's happening within us, not because of what our partner's doing. That that by itself creates space in the partnership for behavioral new ideas to flow, new behaviors to come in. Uh, what really helps us when it comes to behaviors that are less than desirable or even unwanted to ourselves is the experience of emotional safety, like psychological safety, being in the presence of um, being in a caring presence that is genuinely curious and interested and non-judgmental. Like those are the conditions under which uh, people can relax, uh, let down their guard, um, and that relaxation, that kind of lessening of the flight or flight tension, is really what enables new thinking to come forward, fresh thinking, insights, and awakenings. So that's the sort of the climate that we want to be in our partnerships is one where there is goodwill, uh, warmth, caring, and positive rapport, um, and we can create that for our partners. Like we could work on creating that for our partners, and that creates a climate. Um, again, that I think is that naturally leads to the dropping away of less optimal behaviors, and people stepping more fully into their well-being and optimal behaviors. And then finally, a lot of times the idea that our partners need to change is really, it's kind of a projection. Like the other thing that we could do in addition to creating those conditions is really understand and look inward at where the areas where we can change. um, and a lot more often than not, I would say the call for change in another person is kind of us speaking to ourselves. And uh, I think it's imperative to kind of walk our talk before pointing the fingers. We need to show up uh, as our best selves in our partnerships. That means, kind of cleaning up our side of the street. If we want things to be a certain way, taking responsibility for making it that way. Um, Changing where we know we need to change, or at least working on it and being open to it. Uh, Getting neutral about recognizing that, like our partner's behaviors is it's like they're not responsible for our emotional state. All those things are things that we could do on our side of the table that I think uh, I don't know, lay the groundwork really, um, for a change. And then once we get to that place, and as we move in that direction, I mean, we may find that our partner changes and things get better. We may find like that our partner doesn't change, and but it's less of a problem, because we've done this work on our side, so we realize, that's just who they are, and you know, it's not that big of a deal. I can live with that. Or on the other hand, you may find like, yeah, you know what, they're not changing, and this is not really working for me anymore. But you're coming at it in a much more kind of grounded place, so that that whole process is characterized by clarity rather than confusion and chaos. And that's a much better way to go about kind of parting ways in a business, than the route that's filled with rancor. So those are my remarks on change, and I don't know if you have any questions or what that brings up for you, Chris.
Yeah, I've been thinking about something that has been kind of on repeat for me since the spring course, which is, you said something to the effect of there are no relationship problems, there are only state of mind problems, and um, how that feeling of I wish my partner would change X, Y, or Z is really an, o- an invitation, an opportunity for us to look inward and do some of that work that you're describing, cleaning up our side of the street. Um, and it's so easy to see it the other way, to get into that blame game, the expectations being missed that we're attached to, instead of being loose with those things and really focusing here first.
Yeah, it is. In a way, it's not our fault. I feel like there's a lot of conditioning, um, that that we're living with, that causes us to see the outside world as the source of our experience. But the when the reality is that it's all we have is a unified experience. There is no outside. There's just experience, and it's all occurring within our own consciousness, our own awareness. So everything that arises in our awareness is arising in our awareness,
Yeah,
which is sort of a tautology. But if I'm upset, it has nothing to do with something outside of me. It is just my own experience, and our partners are they're not these freestanding. Uh, you know, we're not disconnected from them in any way. I mean, physics has already kind of shown us this. Not, but really, like, just at a very common sense level, like how we show up with somebody depends a lot on that person. We're not like static beings. We're not the same all the time. Like if there's uh, a hostile person in front of me, like I'm gonna kind of crouch and maybe and respond according to their energy, right? And that's how we work. So we're it's a system. It's not to be two kind of like static human beings. It's we're entwined together, and so how we're showing up absolutely determines the partner that we have in that moment.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's really easy to overlook that.
There's another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately and have talked with some friends about. I'm a really big NBA fan. I watch a lot of basketball, and there's a player on the Philadelphia 76ers named Ben Simmons who is great, all-star caliber point guard, really incredible athlete, gets to the bucket and scores kind of on command, but he cannot or does not shoot three-point shots. So a lot of the conversation in basketball around him is, oh, if he would only shoot a 3-pointer, he could be the complete player. He could do it all. And what's holding him back from this? And a couple of weeks ago, he shot his very first 3-pointer in his. I think he's in his third year in the league. And I bring this up because I think this is kind of in partnership. We have these things that are we build these fortresses around pain and hurt and weakness, and sometimes that the belief set that's guiding that creates these behaviors that are really, really strong. And so then
Yeah.
it's almost like, well, why change this? It's working really well. In Ben Simmons' case, why shoot a 3-pointer when I'm an all-star already, when I can do all these other things really, really well? And so I'm curious for him, was there something that happened in his belief set that says, you know what, this doesn't work anymore. I can shoot. I can exercise this vulnerability and it's going to be okay.
What do you think?
I think the answer is yes. I think yeah, and it's not something that necessarily happened because his behavior changed, because he's, shooting more shots in the gym or whatever the case may be. It starts with this state of mind and this shift in perspective and understanding, and then the behaviors happen downstream.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm guessing that they're, I agree with you. I think there maybe had some kind of. I mean, we're speculating here,
Yes.
but maybe there was a part of him that said, maybe it is possible, and I mean, maybe he opened the door, and stepped into that possibility, and then, excuse me. Yeah, and then, but I think like what that brings up for me, Chris, is you know, uh, for ourselves to be receptive to changing is it requires does require some courage.
Yeah.
There's a kind of humility that goes with it, uh to know like that, you know, the way that you've been doing things up until now has been, kind of not wrong but incomplete, and not, and you weren't seeing things totally completely up until now, and now you are. And there's a that requires some humility, and then you're really stepping into the unknown, because now you're in unfamiliar territory. It's a way of being that you haven't been with all your life, and all of a sudden, you're just kind of dangling out there with this new, you know so with that player, I mean, it takes a kind of beginner's mind to be like, well, like I'm walking into this 3-point shot realm, and this is not my strong suit. This is not my comfort zone, and that kind of getting comfortable with that being in the unknown, and and being okay with having been, I don't know, like having, being okay with recognizing, like, geez, I just wasn't seeing things clearly. Now I see things a different way.
Yeah. And kind of going back to that example you used about the tendency to withdraw to find that time and space.
Yeah.
That's also something that I have been prone to do. But I imagine, kind of on the other side of that, the recognition that yeah, this was a way that worked, but it's not a way that works as well as engaging, having this complete kind of approach to it.
Yeah. No, right. I mean, it worked for a time. Um, and then, yeah, but what I have seen is, I as I've woken up to the fact that it's kind of an optional response. It's just something that I developed habitually. I started to see the ways, like, where, oh, geez, I don't really want to be that way, because
Yeah.
I found like I had created so much space in so many of my relationships, and I'm like, that's not cool. It's not very nice. I mean, I didn't know that I was doing it, but now that I see it, I'm like, that must have been hard on the people that were close to me to, like, have me kind of vanish like that. and I feel regret about it. And now it's like, now it's, but again, like it hasn't changed like in an instant. but but having the understanding opened the door to that, to incremental change and to choice, and that's been really nice. And then there's this whole universe of things where I'm probably doing them right now, and you know what I mean? Like, well, one day I'll wake up to them and be like, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah, yeah. As you have more of these like change moments, you step into the unknown. Suddenly, there's going to be some new thing that comes into your field of awareness. Says, "Oh, okay, I have a new understanding about this now."
Yeah, it's just a forever journey, you know, and partnerships are great for that. I mean, they're great for that. That they're I just have found that, when you get into close relationships, if you really want to have good, strong, close relationships, you got to have this humility and reflectiveness and the ability to adapt and change and go with that, and that's just it's a really, it's both humbling but very, very rewarding to be able to shed layers like that. It's really it's a positive direction, and that's why, co-founder dynamics. That's why we're, you know, that's why we do this, Chris. Is because there's so much richness in partnership, and then you add to that that the partners are building these great companies, and you know doing something they care about. They're doing creative work and trying to bring something new to the world, and it sucks when that's led astray by just these emotional challenges. And I don't discount the emotional challenges at all. They're very real. um, but I think that, you know when we have support around us and a community of reflectiveness about the challenges of relationship, we can get the benefit of partnership, and at the same time, hopefully create great companies.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, so that seems like a good note to close on. Thanks for a great conversation, Chris.
Likewise, pleasure as always.
Talk to you soon.